Uh, I am just so thrilled to be talking to you like this, sort of. It's not really in person, but kind of face to face. Because as soon as I opened your book, I just felt this connection to your words. And then, and having a chance to talk to you a little bit offline, I felt this like kindred spirit with you. So thank you for writing Shiner. We are loving it in my book club. And it's just such a gift, I think, when beautiful words and a beautiful story are written and are going to last forever. It's just such a gift to the world. So thank you. When did the story idea first come to you?
Yeah, I think it's been living in my heart for a long time. I grew up, West Virginia was a part of my upbringing. I camped there, and it is just unbelievably beautiful. I mean, there's no other place like it in the world. And the landscape there is just always telling its own story. So I think even before I wanted to become a writer or knew I would become a writer, I'd always dreamed of a story set there. So I think, from a young age, it was sort of living in here,
I'm playing around with something. I don't know if that if I cut in. Sorry to interrupt. I was doing something with technology. So anyway, yes.
But I think where the story like really came to life and got a heartbeat for me was after I published my memoir Cinderland in 2014. That is a book that's about what it's like to be a young woman who needs to keep a secret, and how that secret reverberates throughout a life and throughout a town. And in the process of publishing that book, I had so many women tell me secrets that they'd had to keep, for whatever reason, for their entire lives, because it wasn't safe to tell or it would hurt someone. And I was so moved by that. And I also was so moved by the idea that it is such a great act of compassion to bear witness to someone's story. And I wanted to find a way to celebrate how women do that for each other in the midst of really difficult circumstances that they can't change. So I think that was a big piece of what was in my heart when I wanted to tell this story, because a lot of it is about feeling misunderstood and how feeling misunderstood can change the trajectory of your entire life, and what happens in the novel, for the women, feeling misunderstood makes them long for what might exist off the mountain, things they never experienced. But for some of the men, it makes them bet on the myth of themselves in ways that put their families in danger.
Yes. You talk about that word secrets, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which,
yeah.
Probably every human has at least one. There is this, I'm going to pull this up, this beautiful, beautiful way that you write about secrets. And I know it was something that stood out to a lot of our book club members when you wrote, "The truth turns sour if it idles too long in our mouths. Stories like bottles of shine are meant to be given away." And it's amazing how there are so many secrets laced throughout this book. And it is what ultimately, like, it eats people up inside, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's ultimately what they become buried in their own secrets. And
Yes.
So I think you really, there's so much foreshadowing too, right? So that's just one sense of telling the truth about secrets. Who do you think of the characters? And as you're telling, let me backtrack about the secrets though. When you are, they all have a secret themselves. How do you write that secret so that it unfolds properly in a way that isn't confusing to a reader, but also tells the story of that character naturally?
Yeah. So, I'll tell you, I have to write a lot of drafts of anything I've ever written, and it is really confusing pretty much until it's almost done, when it starts to make sense. And because usually what I like to start with is a certain image or scene, and I don't have much more than that, and I kind of just go with it. So as I'm writing, I surprise myself with what comes out, right? which is great because I think it then, if it surprised me, it's going to surprise the reader, hopefully. But then what I have to do is kind of go back and make it make sense. And I think one of the things that worked out for me and tell the story, even though it doesn't happen chronologically, it's exactly how I wrote it. It's sort of how I pictured it in my mind. Because I think for women, that's kind of how coming of age happens. You know, you're young, you kind of, it's hard to imagine that your mother had ever had a life without you, you know? And I think as you age and you sort of see your mother as a woman, it's this really natural thing to be like, well, what existed before me? And so I sort of, when I was writing, I think I would ask myself a question and then set about answering it. And then it would add this other question. And I kind of just went that way until I kind of reached the end. And then I had to go all the way back to the beginning.
I love that aspect of it because I think you're right. I'm a daughter, and I think some of my favorite moments with my parents are when their old friends come around and they tell me stories about my parents from like their high school days, stories that my parents would never tell me. And I don't know if it's just because I haven't asked or because they don't want to tell those stories or what it is, but it's like, I then see them through the eyes of a totally different age that they are now, right? I suddenly see them as teenagers or someone in their 20s who, you know, maybe had a crush on somebody before they were together, whatever it may be. And so like the young woman in your novel, Ren, she is craving those stories of her parents and wanting to know where they came from and you know, what their why is and really like, what's the backstory?
Mm-hmm. Because that's what happens when you love someone, right? You want to know what existed before, and you, as a child, you can only see one piece of them. That's why it's so great to talk to their friends because you're seeing them as a friend instead of a parent. And that was actually Ivy, you know, who is the narrator kind of the third part of the book. That didn't come until way later. I hadn't thought to give her a section in the book, and I'm so glad that I got to, because then we get to see Ruby through someone else's eyes who really loves her for who she is and not who she performs as, you know, a mother or a wife. And that section taught me a lot, I think, just about being a friend and being a woman, you know.
Let's talk about those two, Ivy and Ruby. They have a really interesting relationship. They are best friends, kind of spirit sisters. I read the book and then I listened to it on Audible, which is a really interesting way to take it in.
Oh, yeah.
You hear a voice put to the words. And as I was listening the second time around, I wondered, and you could give us some insight,
Yeah.
certainly of Ivy's thoughts toward Ruby. Is there a little bit of jealousy there? Because I don't know if I completely picked up on that the first time the way I did it the second time. And I thought, is there some kind of envy and jealousy, even though there's love too? Like, can you talk a little bit more about how you saw that relationship?
I think envy is there, and it's such a source of guilt for Ivy. I think she feels it and it's rearing up in her, and she doesn't like it because she's a very confident person, right? She says, I know what I know and I think what I think, and if you don't like it, forget you, you know? And yet I think she's watching her best friend make what she thinks are bad choices. And there's something sort of natural in her mind that says, if I were you, if I had the choices you have, I would make them better, you know? And I think that's really natural for people who've grown up together and you've always known each other, and yet now you're sort of at this in this position in life where you're like, well, we've got to decide, you know, are we going to stay or are we going to go? And I think that Ivy, she's also trying to figure out what it means to not feel trapped. You know, so much of their relationship that she has with Ruby is built on the fact that they both feel so stuck. And I think she's trying to find her footing outside of that. And she can't help but compare herself to somebody like Ruby, who seems to have it all together.
Is that a real place, by the way, or did you make that up just because of the parallels to everyone feeling trapped with where they are?
Yeah, so I did choose the name of the town. The town itself is sort of a figment of my imagination, but it is very much based and inspired on the place that I used to camp in West Virginia, that's sort of on the eastern side of the state, where they do have these really jagged, high rocks that people will try to cross. And so all of like the landscape itself is very real. But I did make up the town because I wanted to be able to play with it and manipulate it how I wanted for the story and not be sort of set in a certain place.
Yes.
But it's sort of just based on my memories of what moved me when I was in West Virginia, all the water and the trees and all that.
Yeah, and which was probably smart. I think I remember hearing Billy Joel talk about the song Allentown once, and that
Yeah.
people would get really upset because they're like, that's not really what Allentown's like. So those people are very protective of their own city. So that
Which I went through with Cinderland when I did write about an actual town, and people had that same reaction, which I totally understand. So I just thought I don't want to be hemmed in by that, because what that does is it will sort of take attention away from what the story is that you're trying to tell. So yeah, that's a great thing about writing fiction.
The line that drew me in, and you and I have had this conversation offline, but I told you I felt like your book called to me when I was at the bookstore, like, come here.
That makes you so happy.
Right? It was like the book gods were shining down on this book, Shiner.
Yeah.
And so and I've talked about that as I usually do, I'll read the first page just to go, okay, does this even grab me?
Mm-hmm.
And then I read the first line. Making good moonshine isn't that different from telling a good story. No one tells a story like a woman. I love that so much. And then I found it so fascinating to find out that was the last line that you wrote in the book.
Yes, that first section called True Story, which ended up being the prologue, was the last thing I wrote before the book sold to Penguin Random House. For the longest time, I had just wanted the story to start with the burning. And hopefully everybody's read the book. I'll try not to give any spoilers, but I don't think.
At this point now, if you're watching.
Yeah. Okay. I just like to be careful. But, I just had been so attached to wanting it to open with fire. But, in talking with my agent who'd read it a few times, and sort of, she'd made the really important observation that there's something really key about having this like global view of what you're doing, right, as a writer. And because so much of the book is about storytelling, and it's about place and how you tell a story in a place. And I kind of wanted to a way to set the mood so it really felt like you were being told a story around a campfire, because for me growing up, that is exactly how I heard stories, was around a campfire. And I wanted to try to recreate that mood for the reader before I jumped into this really intense scene. And because what I have felt like, just as being somebody who's from Northern Appalachia, is that there's a lot of stories and books from that area, about that area, but there's not a lot that are celebrated for being written by women. So I really wanted to write about what does it really mean to be a woman who's telling a story, because I didn't want it to look like, a woman just sort of steps into a man's role and goes on this hero's journey. Because I could have written that book, and I would like to read that book where, a woman becomes a moonshiner and she's a bootlegging in the back of her pickup truck and all those things. But I think that there's something really specific about the way a woman carries her history and the way that she bears the secrets of the women who came before her. And there is something equally as powerful as, the way a man tells a story. So I wanted to make it clear from the beginning that this is not, we're setting a new set of rules here for how we're going to tell a story. And that's why it's sort of set up, instead of going forward in time, we kind of go backward.
Yeah, I love that's so beautiful. Everything you just said, we are a book club of all women who celebrate female authors. So that really mirrors a lot of what you were just saying. 3 of your main characters in this book are women. So how do you as a writer approach developing each woman's story to do justice to her uniqueness, because
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if sometimes when you're writing, you can have a favorite, right? I feel like then I would go, okay, I don't want someone to get lost along the way, right? I don't want her why to end up getting buried and lost. So how did you as a writer, this is just the writer and me kind of like geeking
Yeah.
out about how you properly develop each one so that we feel like we know each one well?
So actually, the way that the book is set up, we kind of have like a chunk that's just Ren, and then this chunk that's just Flynn, and then this section that's just Ivy. What I like to do is sort of go all in with one person. Even if it ends up getting separated in the end, I would like to just spend a couple months and say, I'm going to just focus on this person. It's sort of like, spending quality time with somebody, right? It's different when it's one-on-one, right? And you're sort of invested in that. And in that moment, that is my favorite character. I think that person deserves a series of books. I think that person did not get everything that they deserved. You know what I mean? Like I treat them, they're like, they're my best friend, like they're my family. And in some ways, I think in the process of that, I'm creating a relationship with them that is then reflected in how they relate to the other characters. So each one of the characters has a bit of a piece of me, whether it's a triumph of mine or a failure or a dream or a loss. I try to find a really personal way to connect with each one to make it feel authentic. And then the work for me really comes with, okay, like how do I bridge these things together? So I save that for the end because I really want to feel like I know the characters and they feel like my family before I start kind of integrating them. That's what works for me because I think I'm the sort of person like when I'm with you, I want to be with you,
Yeah.
and so yeah, that's what I like when people give that to me. So I think because that's part of my natural personality, it's going to reflect that way in the way that I write and the way that I think of a story too, is that I want to give each character what I want to get from somebody, in terms of time and attention. So
Is,
um
is it more fun to write the characters that you really love or that are very like likable or lovable in a book, or is it more fun to write the ones that aren't necessarily as well liked?
I think there's something therapeutic about writing about people that you don't like. So we'll say, the sort of, if we want to call him the villain in the book, Briar, um, I did enjoy writing about him just because I think he is such a complex character that I think makes bad choices, but there's still something really redeeming in how real his faith is to him. It's misguided maybe, but it's not counterfeit, and I think that's something that I appreciate about him, even as it was therapeutic for me to say, there's problems with the way that you live life, Buster. Because I think one of the things that when I started to write the book, I thought, I want to talk about how women pay the price for men's convictions.
Yes.
And that was sort of in my mind from the beginning. And so I sort of, all that angst I think that I have felt just growing up, I sort of like saddled into him. And there was something really therapeutic in doing that. And I will say, every book or everything that I write, I just need to have something in there that also gives me joy. And because you need that balance, I feel like as a writer, if you're only writing things that are so hard and difficult, at the end of like 3 years, what it takes you to write, you're gonna be super depressed, So, and that's what Moonshine was for me. Like, it just gave me so much joy, and Flynn as a character gave me so much joy. And I think that the reason I was able to write Briar so well was that Flynn is this sort of obverse, right? They're like polar opposites, and I really enjoyed getting to show who each of them were by showing how they're different. Yeah.
You've said on our book club page that Flynn's your favorite. Yeah, you're gonna pick a favorite child. Flynn is your favorite. So then on the polar opposite, you have Briar, who just isn't as likable. When you're drawing when you're writing up these characters and you're drawing from people who you know, right? Because that's, I mean, that has to come from somewhere, right? They're somehow based on whether it's one specific person or a compilation of people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When it's someone who you don't like and they're based on maybe either loosely on someone else or directly someone else, which you can say if they were, if there was, do you come to learn or appreciate something about that person that you may not have thought so highly of or not liked as much? Is it, because you mentioned it can be therapeutic, is there sort of forgiveness of people, or at least maybe an understanding of why they are the way they are?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in my first draft, I tend to be like really negative, and so I just let him have it, and I didn't give him any redeeming qualities, that kind of thing. And there's something I think necessary in that being a first step, right? And then after that, you can sort of mold it, because I think what's most important is that everybody deserves a humanity, you know, for the most part. And trying to capture that on the page, I think it creates an opportunity for you as a writer and you as a human to sort of step into somebody else's shoes who has made poor decisions, who has, you know, put other people at risk, and think about what life might have been like for them, you know. I think it creates a fuller picture. And then, you know, for me personally, I mean, Briar isn't really based on any one person, but sort of just, I think, maybe the system that I grew up in, what it did to the men there. He's a compilation or sort of a composite of a lot of that, and a lot of my frustration with, um, you know, sort of religion where I grew up. Even though I'm still a person of faith very much, I think I took a lot of issue, and I take a lot of issue with sort of the freedoms men are given that women don't have. And so I think, you know, Briar became this bucket at first for all of that. And there's a place for that, but I think when you're writing a book for somebody else to enjoy, there's got to be more than that, you know.
What was the line in the book too? I believed in my father's God, but not his religion, or something to that effect, which is a really powerful line, I thought. I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to, especially when it comes to that topic of faith and religion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think one of the things too that I appreciate about the way the book turned out in the end is that every character in there has their own way of expressing faith, and they're all different, and there isn't a right one. You know, Briar believes in miracles. Flynn really sees God in the earth. Ivy, you know, finds God in suffering. I think Wren finds God in hope, you know, and imagination. And there's something really beautiful about everybody sort of finding it for themselves.
As I read the book and then listened to it, it's a movie, right? Like, I'm like, I can see this. I can either see the movie or I can see the Netflix series that, to me, like, almost has like an Ozark feel to it.
Yeah.
Do you see that too? Because I'm like, anybody who's listening, we need to like make this happen. I was like, we need to become producers, raise money, make this happen.
Would it be a dream come true?
Wherever you are, like this, I mean, it is there. It's or a series. Like, I think it could be a series to the point where there are characters I still feel like you could pick up on. Like, do you feel like you're done with these characters? Because I think I still am like, all right, there's still more to tell about Wren and Flynn and Sunny and Caleb. I mean, there are characters who maybe we just even got to know a little bit about that. I think there's still more of a backstory to tell about them.
Oh yeah, I mean, because you know, what you see in the book is sort of the result of, you know, the book is less than 300 pages. I had written double that probably, and then it, you know, got condensed over a series of edits. So absolutely. I mean, my characters, I just feel like I'm like ride or die, you know, they're like with me for life kind of thing. And I would love to write about them again. And, you know, so the biggest difference, I think Flynn's section was much longer, and I went into his background a little bit more and his father's background, Sherrod, who was sort of, you know, your old timer moonshiner, and that stuff was really fun to write. So in my mind, you know, one of the cool things about being a writer is like when you read a book, you're sort of seeing a slice of something, right? But for me, there's this whole cloud of just life that they have lived that I see, you know, that got cut or wasn't, you know, because a lot of it comes down to, I think, the final shaping of a book. You're really trying to hit a certain mood. So there was a lot of stuff that I had that just didn't fit the mood that the book was, you know, creating.
So
But I mean, that's, yeah.
are there pages then that were cut that you think could still end up having life? Do they those pages still exist somewhere, or when you cut something, do you cut it and you're just done with it?
Yeah, you know, I always keep it, because I think it's really important as a writer. If there's such a difference between writing and publishing, so I will always have a version that is like, this is just for me, the writer. You know, I have this, and it has these things that I love in it, and then you can sort of hold on to that, and then, you know, when you go to make decisions about what's going to make the book, you know, marketable and all those things, you could, if you have to say goodbye to some of that beloved material, it still exists. And what's so cool about being a writer nowadays is that, you know, books are taking many forms, movies, TV shows, and so it is, you know, that material is like close to me. And you're right. I mean, even with Ruby and Ivy, there's just a lot there.
I also think during this time where the world shut down and we were quarantined and then moving into the social distancing and all of that, that the people, look, we've always loved books and writing has always been important, but I feel like there's almost a rebirth to read and to turn a page again.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd gone through a period of time where I was just, I always wanted to listen to books or read books, but I would go so much that that's what I would do. I would listen to them.
Mm-hmm.
Something different about turning a page and reading your work. And I would go, I don't know what that word means, so I'm going to look it up right now. Right. So then you're, not only are you taking in a story, but you're learning and gaining knowledge. I mean, that's a big part of it too, just knowing new words. There were things that you wrote about that were happening within the hills of West Virginia. And I thought, you know, I want to know what that tree looks like. So I'm going to Google what that tree is so I can have the visual, because you really paint a beautiful descriptive picture of what the landscape is like. And credit to you. You really, I mean, you do know how to weave words beautifully. Were you always a writer, by the way, from a young age? Like, did you love writing?
Yeah, so, you know, I've always loved to read. Loved it. I think where I grew up, you know, my parents are voracious readers, both of them. But where we lived, you know, in kind of like coal and steel country, when I was in school, we just read dead white dudes. You know what I mean? So it wasn't even in my like playing field that women can do this. Women can tell stories, which is why it's like also so powerful that I could open Shiner this way and say, no, there is a real importance to the way a woman tells a story that, you know, deserves attention. So I remember I had mentioned, you know, to someone older in my community that I'd wanted to be a writer. And she was like, really? That's not going to happen. Because you know what? It was kind of like telling somebody you wanted to be a finger painter, you know, like, really? but then, you know, when I got to college and some of my professors started introducing me to female writers that were still living and working, like Toni Morrison and Alice Walker, and Sue Monk Kidd was somebody that I came across on my own that was so influential on me. It sort of just opened up what I thought might be possible. So I went to college and got a degree in like labor relations and human resources, and I worked in that for a few years. But it was just like this thing in my heart that said, like a call that I heard, and I thought, I need to at least try to answer it, you know, so let me try. And I mean, this was a long time ago. This was back in maybe 2006, 2007. I wrote a whole novel that was completely different storyline, wasn't very good. And And then I sort of I had to keep starting again. And then at that point I went back to school, got a master's in creative writing. But I like telling that story because I think it's never too late to start. And I think that voice in our heads that say it's too late, when you hear that, you can say, this is just a sign that good change is coming, and I'm going to like ride the wave. And, there is such a thing as good failure, and there is such a thing as trying again. And, I thought that first book I wrote, I said, if it's not this, I'm not going to be able to write another one. And so it's a really wonderful surprise to say, oh no, I do have more than one story to tell,
Where would you tell somebody who's thinking that they have a book in them or they have a story in them to tell? Like, do you just start by writing it down? Is it an outline? You mentioned that you went back to school and took courses. Do you think that's really important? Or, if somebody doesn't have the means to do that, I don't know. Like, where would you begin? What would you tell somebody?
So I'll say, the only reason I was actually able to go back to school was because we were living in New York City, and city tuition is extremely cheap. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to afford it. And that's a really important thing to mention because a lot of MFA programs are prohibitively expensive. And so do I think you need to go back to school to write? Absolutely not. I think the best thing you can do is read a lot and read widely and just start. So something that I actually do, I've done it 3 times now. Every time that I have written a book, and I'm on the 3rd time right now, is I like to read this book. It's called The Artist's Way. It's by Julia Cameron. And it is this, you can do it if you're a painter, you can do it if you're a choreographer. It is just about how to access and nurture your own creative spirit. And I don't like to have much of a plan. I don't outline when I write. I get myself a notebook because I think reading is a very physical act. Like you mentioned, turning the page. I find writing to be very similar. I like to put my pencil to paper in a notebook. It becomes this meditative thing, that I enjoy. And that's always where I start. So doing something like The Artist Way works for me because I kind of like trying to figure out how to access my subconscious. So I think what I would tell somebody is that it's important to become a student of your own habit of mind. Meaning, once you start to understand how your brain works, you'll kind of get a sense of where you might begin as a writer. So if you're somebody who really thrives under having a plan and organization, write an outline. If you're somebody who likes to throw it to the wind, you do what I do. And just sort of start a notebook. And that means that you throw a lot of pages away, but I like that process of writing so it doesn't feel like wasted time. I think the biggest, classes are great, and there's a lot of great online classes now that you can take. And I think the biggest thing is to just keep at it, I don't know if you feel that way. I know you've written a book too.
I think you just have to start.
Yeah.
And I'm with you too. I like to write things down, like pen to paper. I'll carry a notebook with me everywhere. So I do love that. But like, I do believe that when you're a writer telling a story, whether it's, something personal with self-help or a book like Shiner or memoir, there is some divine intervention that happens too. Like, I think your brain gets into a state, and it might come to you. I don't know when you did most of your writing. I liked to do it when the world was asleep. So it's like everything would come to me at like from midnight to like 4 a.m. And I'm not normally up during that time, but that's just when it would happen. So like, I think you just have to go with it when it comes to you.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. And then finding out the ways to get to that spot, the best way that you get there is half the battle. Creating an environment for yourself where you're kind of like nurturing your own creativity, which is hard because I think often, especially as women, we're taught to be practical, we're taught to tamp that stuff down, or we're taught that it sort of belongs in our younger years, when really, all the women I know are super badass, and you know what I mean, as they age as well. So those stories are important, and you kind of have to like figure out the best way to unsilence yourself, And that can be a really emotional process sometimes.
It's true. And almost like you have to just get it out. You know, you can go back and edit and take things
Yes.
out.
Yes.
Did everybody that you gave Shiner to right away, did they get it? Like, I know how much I love it and it's personal to you, but did you have rejection along the way?
Yes. I mean, yes. So this is how it went down. I mean, I think probably the most rejection I ever experienced was with my first book, Cinderland. It took me a long time, years to find an agent, a wonderful agent that I still work with, who I love and represents me so well. We worked on the novel, and then it took her 6 months, or the memoir, it took her 6 months to sell it. A lot of people just said no, 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 no. And you take that so personally when it's your story, right? But then, with Shiner, what I learned from Cinderland is I have to be really careful who I show my work in progress to, because if you show it to the wrong person, it can send you down this terrible spiral, where you're second guessing yourself so much. So I really trust my agent's gut reaction and her opinion. So I now with Shiner, I just sent it to her, and and we went back and forth through a lot of edits. What was interesting and then it ended up selling to Penguin Random House pretty quickly. But what ended up happening is that the editor who bought it there, we did all these revisions together over the course of a year. I was told it was done. Then she left, and another editor picked it up and said, I really don't like the changes that you made. We have to go back to the beginning and start again. And then I had to do a whole other year of revisions trying to get it to the state that it's in now. And now that I see the finished product, I love the book. I love how it turned out, but I felt so discouraged in the middle of it. Because, I was actually, when I found that out that my editor was leaving and I was having to go back to the beginning, I was 7 months pregnant. I had gestational diabetes, and I was just mad all the time.
Oh, yeah,
I also had, like a 2-year-old at home, and I thought, there is no way I'm going to be able to finish this book. There is no way, and I sort of, let that voice talk, and then I would work when I had time, and I let it talk, and then the book got done. So.
Gosh, I hear that, and I think of all of us who've read it and who are loving it, who are like, thank you for not quitting.
Oh.
Because on a journey like that, when you have all of those roadblocks, I mean, that's just for an example of so many different situations in life, right? Yours is about writing a book, but whatever anybody else has going on out there, like you have roadblock after roadblock, and it's like, so it would be so the easy thing is to do, all right, I surrender, I quit.
Yeah.
So the harder part is to push through, keep doing the work, so that, because the prize is at the end. And I'm sure for you, I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but I know just as being a writer, anytime someone tells you how much they love your writing, it has to just be like, that's everything, right?
It is. The best thing about publishing this book, hands down, has been being able to connect with readers, which I was afraid I wasn't going to get to do because the pandemic has sort of, here I am in my bedroom, and that's kind of where I've done every promotional thing. But like, I love getting to talk with readers who appreciated it, because that's my favorite thing about reading. Like, I feel like when I read a book and I love it, not only am I transported to that place and that time or that character, but I feel like I'm spending really quality time with the author. And I love that. So being able to be on the other side of that and have people say, I've been stuck inside, or, I grew up in West Virginia, or whatever it is, there's no feeling like it. It is incredible. And I do not take it for granted, because it was, I started writing this book 2014,
Oh,
so
wow.
it's been a long time, and I had 2 kids in between. And, it was something else that was interesting, was that when I started writing it, I wanted to write about people that felt forgotten, and right before we started to go on submission to sell the book was when the 2016 election happened. And all of a sudden, every eye was sort of turned on West Virginia in a way that it never had been before. And then all of, everybody was assuming that I had like written this book in relation to it, when I thought, no, like this had existed so much before then, So it's just like, it was a real journey of trying to roll with the punches, which I'm not great at, but
You're like, I've been in labor with this book for 2 years already.
Exactly.
We talked about some of the characters. One supporting character of the book, I mean, really the name is Moonshine. I mean, Moonshine, it's certainly a really important piece of the book. What made you interested in that whole world, the Moonshiner world, and how much were you able to dive into it personally?
So what is so cool about Moonshine is that I did not see it coming. I was researching things like faith healing and mountain life and all of that. And I feel like in a lot of ways that Moonshine sort of found me. I was reading a lot of oral history about, like I said, faith healing, snake handling, all that stuff. And in the same book that I was reading, the section right beside the faith healing section was called Moonshine as a Fine Art. And I thought the title was so beautiful for this section. And it's a book, if you're interested, it's called Foxfire. It's this series of books where teens in Appalachia went into the mountains and interviewed people about the way that they lived and the things they made. I mean, caning chairs and planting by the signs. I mean, all this stuff. And it's just straight up the people speaking, just transcribed. And this section of the book had diagrams for making a still. It had where they got their corn, how they got their water, and I was so moved by it because, I mean, I'm nothing like those men who do it, but I found it so similar. Creating a bottle of moonshine is just like writing a book. And it's funny because they say, there's a story in every bottle. And that's so true, because no bottle of moonshine is exactly alike, because it depends on how the corn tastes and the humidity in the air and what the water was like, the mineral makeup of the creek that it comes from, the person who makes it and how they like it. And I think that's just like telling a story. And even though we're so different, I found such a kinship in these artists who build a life around this thing that they love, because for them, it's not just whiskey, right? It is memories of the time that they spent with their parents or their father around a campfire or a still. I mean, it's this like real cultural footprint. And there's this line in the book that says, people drink moonshine to taste the life that they live. And I think that's really true. It's taking part in it is a way to celebrate, your crops, your water, your people, and it is kind of a paradox because it's made alone in the dark at night, but it's meant to be shared. And it kind of creates these really special moments. So, like I mentioned, I was pregnant twice and nursing twice in the course of writing this book. So I didn't have a lot of time to actually taste it. And so, of course, I thought, oh, this is doomed because I don't know anything about moonshine. But so I was pretty much done with the book by the time that I actually got to taste it and went to a distillery. But I'm so glad it happened that way, because I think it forced me to think about things beyond taste, because taste is sort of what an outsider would think of first. I needed to sort of try to get up inside and say, why does this really matter to people? So I had to think more about what kind of story it was telling, rather than, the flavor makeup of some jar of moonshine. But once I tasted it, it was such a blast. I always recommend to people, if you're able to visit a distillery where you can talk to the person who makes it, you'll find everybody has this unique story about how they came to moonshine or why they made the bottle, that they did. And it's a way to bear witness to somebody's story, like I mentioned at the beginning. And it's just a great way to spend an afternoon. It's sort of like appreciating an artist, so to speak.
Well, you were so great because you shared photographs of your trip with your husband to the distillery in Pennsylvania. And so I put up there, I was like, when time is right. I'm like, I want to get some of the women who are in this book club. Like, I mean, I know it'll be a little bit of a trek, but I mean, we're just one state over. So I would love to make that trip and visit a distillery. I think that would be a really fun thing to do. And I'm sure even when we come out of the quarantine phase, hopefully there will be more that you're going to get to do with the book and meet people and get on the road.
Yeah, that's my hope, because what I wanted to do when I published the book was to just go around and visit some distilleries and sort of celebrate it. So I'm still going to do it. It'll just take some time. So I am going to find one in the Cleveland area, I believe.
Okay. Well, we're there. First, I mean, something's going to, listen, you're going to see us in person, or I'm going to see you in person, and then anybody else who can come who's part of the book club, because we just love you. Before you go, there's so much I want to talk to you about, but I also want to leave some questions too, because you've been so generous, and we're going to do a Zoom discussion with any of the readers in the book club who are able to hop on.
Yes, I can't wait. I've been dying to do that. Like, I want to talk with people who've actually read it.
I know, because I sometimes think, like, I always feel like people who have read it, like, even though I'm an interviewer for a living, like, they sometimes ask even way better questions, right? So I think that's going to be really cool to do that and have the other women dig into what really spoke to them, or, you know, learn a little bit more about the why of how things came to be. But I noticed there, I had mentioned it earlier, there's really a lot of foreshadowing in your book. And I wonder if that is done purposefully, or if that happens on accident. Like, I wrote a couple down. One, excuse me, was you wrote there was a storm coming, and that was a description of nature in the mountains before Ivy died. So it's like, I have to take a sip of water. Excuse me. So there was that. There was a storm coming. And then Ruby, I love this line. So sorry. Sorry, everybody's like choking on nothing. I wish I was like eating something good. Must have been on my own, like, spit or something. I don't know. But Ruby, when she says, I love this. There are two ways to see a mountain: the view from the top and the view of the top, which is like, right? That's just all about perspective, right? So you're going to learn that throughout the book. So when you are writing about in a way of foreshadowing, I'll get back to that original question, is that done purposefully and thoughtfully, or does it happen on accident sometimes?
I think it's actually 50-50 for me. I mean, you actually gave a good example where, you know, that first section where there's a storm coming and that kind of thing, that was, you know, kind of already in existence, and me setting the mood, and just what I saw in my mind's eye when I closed my eyes, that turned out to be, you know, very foreshadowing. And then in the second circumstance, that scene at, you know, it is pretty much the beginning of the novel where Ruby's saying that about, you know, where you're looking from the top or the bottom of the mountain. That was something that I added very much at the end of the process, because I was trying to kind of prep people for what was coming, and why, you know, it's kind of like that thing where you're like, let's pay attention, you know, pay attention. And like, you know, somebody when whispering, come in close. Like, that's what I hope those moments do, is like, you might think you understand what's going on here, but you really don't, you know? So yeah, it's 50-50, which is great, because it's something that happens when I go back and I read something I wrote, is I'll be like, oh, I had no idea I left that little Easter egg for myself. And then those are the sorts of things that keep you going, because writing a book can take a really long time, and it's a real roller coaster from beginning to end, and you're constantly second guessing whether you have what it takes to write something people are going to want to spend time with, you know? So when you find something like that your subconscious like left for you, you feel like, okay, it gives you that energy to say, okay, I'm going to give it one more try.
Well, you knocked it out of the park. This was just like, I just love it so much. I just love it so much. And I feel so lucky. Like, there's also, I'll tell you, like, when I'm just starting a book club. I've never even been in a book club except for like when I was in first grade or something.
Yeah.
We called it Kittens, right? I was like, and I think it was just like a reading group. Or like the local library when you'd go and read books. But I've never, as an adult, been in a book club. I see what other people are reading. I take recommendations, but to start one, and I mean, full disclosure, like you pick up a book and you recommend it to other people and you know you love it, but it could be like, you know, I love the pizza joint down the street and somebody else might not like it, right? So you put it out there and you go, well, let's see, like, let's see what happens. Except like, I'm like, I love it so much. I think I'm going to love it. And then I gave it to my mom, who's very well read. Like she reads a lot. So I thought, okay. So it's like, I'm just waiting, like with bated breath, like, okay, what's she going to say? And when she told me she loved it, then I was like, that is it. I made a great choice. So thank you for writing this beautiful story. And thank you for being so gracious and lovely and willing to give of your time and have these conversations and continue the conversation and just interact with all of us through social media, which, I mean, I think the beautiful thing about it is that we can connect that way and build a community in a positive way on positive stories and by learning from each other. So I know the conversation we're having is going to continue at some point, but I also want to be respectful of your time and your day and just say thank you so much for carving out this time this afternoon.
Honestly, the pleasure's all mine. It's a dream come true to get to talk with people who read the book and just have any kind of reaction to it. I mean, because when you sit down to write a book, it's hard to even imagine what something like this is going to be like. So, especially now when things are really hard, to hear that my book moved somebody in some way, it's just amazing. So I'm so grateful that we got to chat and we're getting to connect. And I seriously, like, come with all your questions or whatever, because it's going to be super great. I can't wait.
I know. I think it is going to be great. And then the other thing that you said is true too. There's so much going on in the world, and there's I think sometimes we just get like overwhelmed by it all and discouraged by it all. And so reading and stories are a way to escape. And having a community like this where we can all come to the table with ideas and with respect and interact with each other in this really beautiful way, to be able to just kind of like shut the door on a lot of the negativity that's going on out there, I think is just another example of why women are amazing and the beauty of a good story.
And how we gather strength from each other, you know? We need it now more than ever.
Amen, sister. Well, I'll be seeing you again soon.
Yeah.
The next time, a whole lot more of us on here.
I can't wait.
Oh, thank you so much, Amy Jo.
Thank you.
All right. Mwah. Talk
Bye.
soon. Bye.
Bye.